One of the reasons that we're doing today's broadcast, and Brandy has so graciously agreed to help us when we talk about the basics of window treatment photography, is for the 2015 Envision and Ingenuity Design Competition. The award ceremony, as many of you know, is held every year at IWCE, and that will be no different this year. But the entry opening has begun for Envision and Ingenuity Design Competition. It opened up on Monday. The competition will close August 15. Now, for some of you who have entered before, please be aware that the competition deadlines are a bit earlier this year. That's because the show is earlier this year. Winners will be notified before the end of the year, typically in December of this year, 2014. The categories for this year's design competition, the Envision portion, which is the design competition portion, are combination treatments, curtain and draperies, decorative hardware, specialty window fashions, soft shades, that's fabric shades, top treatments, whole room integration. Obviously, we don't design window coverings in a vacuum. And a new category this year, which is motorized window fashions. And if that's of interest to you, you'll want to read the guidelines for the design competition, because we're requiring a short video of the motorization of the product in this setting. So if you're interested, or you have some projects that you're working on right now, or you've worked on in the past year, please enter. We're always looking for great window covering projects. The workroom portion of the design competition, the Ingenuity competition, again has combination treatments, curtain and draperies, specialty window fashions, meaning specialty windows, top treatments, ingenious installation, and two new categories: custom soft furnishings, which is top of bed, decorative pillows, etc., focusing primarily on bedding, and then upholstery and slipcovers, which is also a new category. How do you enter? Well, visit our webpage at wf-vision.com, download the reg form. First step is to choose a category that you want to enter your project or projects in. Gather up and photograph high-quality digital images, and obviously after today's webinar we're all going to have a leg up on the competition, because Brandy is going to give us some great information. And then tell us about your project through your design concept statement that's part of your reg form, again by the deadline, which is August 15th of this year. And then this could be you. These are last year's winner in Vegas. The Envision Design Competition Award Ceremony will be held January 21st, 2015 at IWCE Vision 15. Again, we're in Las Vegas this year as part of Design and Construction Week. We're co-locating with 3 shows this year, which is amazing. It's all one-stop shop, trust me. We're co-locating with KBIS, International Builders Show, and Surfaces has come into the family, and they will be at the Bellagio doing tile and flooring, which is also great. So this could be you, one of the winners. This is last year's Award of Excellence winner, Lee Anderson, with Grace, and all the winners for the Award of Excellence and the Workroom of the Year receive 2 nights of hotel accommodations and a full design pass to attend all the events at IWCE. All the winners get complimentary seminars and exhibit hall, and obviously the recognition within the magazine and during the award ceremony. It's always a fun night, of which Brandy does photograph for us. So I would like to introduce Brandy. Brandy is the WF Vision photographer. You might have seen her around some of the shows. She has an art photography degree from the University of Houston, and I had to pull this off your bio, Brandy. I loved it when you said, "My style is free and easy. I'm a perky and goofy lady, so I'm not the right photographer for everybody." So I thought that I love that. So welcome, Brandy, and we're excited to have you on today and talk about the basics of window treatment photography.
Great. Thank you so much, Deb.
Yep.
Okay.
Looks
Okay,
like
good.
you're up.
Everyone can see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, I've got...
Well, my name is Brandy, as we just... Oh, sorry, Deb.
We're good.
My name is Brandy, as we just covered. I've probably taken your picture if you've been to Visions before. We're going to talk today about photographing interiors, and this is one of the most difficult things you can photograph, especially when you're photographing into a window. So y'all give yourselves a pat on the back for tackling this. If you're curious about my work, it's brandystaysphotography.com. I'm located in Houston, and if you ever need a photographer, just give me a call. Most of the pictures in this webinar are my own, but all of the window treatments are from the Visions magazine, so you might actually see your own treatments. So just give yourself a shout out on the chat or something. Congratulations, you made the webinar. Okay, so one of the things you're going to need for this webinar is to have your camera in your hand, because the first part of this webinar is talking about how to use your camera, what the settings mean, and it really only makes sense if your camera is in your hand. Also, if you can't see my screen, it's kind of important, so make sure you can see what's going on here. Okay, so let's start off with equipment choices. Here we have our basic point and shoot. They're lightweight, cheap, easy to use. They're not great for what you need them for because they don't have a lot of power and they don't have a lot of options. They kind of do what they want to do. So we're going to try to avoid these if possible, but there are some things we can do with them. This is getting a little better. You're going to need a camera that has different options, like a little dial where you can do manual mode, shutter priority, aperture priority, and we'll talk about that later. But as long as you have options and not just auto setting, then you're looking good. Also, any camera that has this little bracket at the top, this is called a hot shoe, and it allows you to add another attachment, like a flash, and that will be very important later. So if your camera doesn't have one of these, it's going to make your life a little more difficult when we try to light up a room. And then we have the single lens reflex camera. This is like your D40s or your Rebels, either Canon, Nikon. They're really interchangeable. They both take wonderful pictures. I shoot with Nikon, but I feel like Canon's a little user-friendly, a little more user-friendly. Yeah, the great thing about these is they have interchangeable lenses, which can come in handy if you want to start to invest in lenses. Okay, let's talk about lenses real quickly. I'm going to go through this very quickly because it's not critical to what we're doing. Most of the time, we're just going to use a standard lens that comes on our camera. The millimeter right here is, oh, I just got an echo here. That's how wide your lens is. And when I say wide, I mean when you look through the viewfinder with this lens on your camera, it's how much you see in the image. So a 50 millimeter, as you can see, is kind of a portrait lens. You're not going to see very much. You're not going to use this to photograph a room. And anytime you see a millimeter that doesn't have a dash, that means it's a fixed lens, and that means it doesn't zoom. You're going to have to move physically back and forth. So that probably isn't going to be what we want either. So I'm going to skip these fixed lenses because dog butt. Yes, we don't need this. Okay, and you can see this number is starting to get smaller, and these pictures are starting to get wider. Let's go back. Okay, the smaller the number, the more we can, the smaller the millimeter, right here, the more we can see of the frame. Okay, so, well, this one's too close, but as you can see in this 15 millimeter, you're going to start to get this distortion around the edges, but you can see a whole lot more. You can see the top of this door frame even. Okay, the tilt shift lens is something we're going to talk about later because it is extremely useful for interior photography, because what it does is it corrects for the distortion that you get. We'll talk about it later, but it's very useful, but you're not going to find one of these for cheap. These are going to run you about $400. 16 to 35, now we're getting into more like something that comes on your camera lens. When it's at 16, it's very wide, so you see a lot more in the frame. And then you zoom into 35, this is probably at about 35. Oh no, this one's at 16, excuse me. You see much less. 24 to 70 is a very versatile lens. Oh, I don't know what happened. It's probably what I would recommend. It's what I shoot with all the time. The 24 is going to be, 24 millimeter is going to be wide enough to capture a good portion of the room. And then the 70 millimeter is going to be nice and close so you can zoom in on your details. Okay, 16 to 35, just some examples. You can see the difference. And then here's a 24 to 70. You can see you're standing at the edge of the bed at this bottom picture, and you can see both, practically this entire wall, which is nice. Okay, so those were just some lenses. That's what the millimeter means. It's really not that critical unless you're constantly struggling to get what you need in frame. And that just means you need a wider lens, which means you need a smaller millimeter. Okay, so let's talk about white balance, which is something that is really troublesome when you're shooting an interior. So all light has a different color. Exterior light comes from the sun. It has a blue light. So when you take a picture of the window, all the light that's coming in is either going to look white or blue. And then if you zoom out and you take a picture of like a lamp next to the window, that's going to look red. And that is where we're really going to struggle with light balance, with white balance, because you're dealing with a photographer's nightmare there. So your camera is usually on auto, which means when you point it at something, it decides what color everything in the frame should be. Sometimes you can tell it to do other settings, and sometimes it can get stuck on those. Like if you tell it to do a tungsten setting, but you're outside, it's going to look like this because it's doing it it's shooting it at a different Kelvin temperature. So we're going to make sure that our white balance is on auto because our cameras are pretty smart and they're going to do a pretty good job. If you're taking pictures and it's just not true to life and you're just getting these shades like this, here's another example, everything looks like this, it's probably your white balance. For instance, this picture looks correct. It was taken under a tungsten light in the tungsten white balance setting, so it looks right. But then we switched to the daylight white balance setting and took it under a tungsten light, and it looks way wrong. So, but if we had done it on auto, it probably would have been correct. And here's an example for the opposite. So this cat is in daylight, but we took it on the tungsten setting, so it looks wrong. This can usually be found in the menu. Sometimes there's a button at the top for white balance, but I'll show you later where to look for white balance. Okay, so let's talk about how to get your camera to do what you want it to do, which is probably the most frustrating thing. There are three important elements that make a picture. Everything else is, except for white balance, is negligible. You have the aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO. Those are basically the ingredients for your photograph, and they tell your camera what to do with the light it's given. So this is how we're going to control those three settings. We all have this little dial, hopefully, on our camera with these silly little pictures that we never know what means. Right here we have manual, which if you're feeling ambitious, you can do manual. But I'm going to teach you how to use the aperture priority. The A does not stand for auto. This auto does, but the A does not stand for auto. If you have a Nikon. I think it just says A. This is the shutter priority. It also says S on Nikon, and we're going to talk about those in a minute. But this is where you're going to change your mode. And we're going to take it off auto because we're going to learn how to use it. If you're curious, this is what all these silly icons mean. I never use the icons, but they can be helpful if, you're just new at it and somebody's running, that's helpful. But we're really going to focus on these settings right here. Okay, so let's talk about aperture. Right, we're going to come back to these settings. First, let's talk about what the aperture is. Basically, your lens is a giant eyeball, and the aperture is the pupil of the eyeball. So it can get bigger or smaller to let more or less light in. And what the aperture controls, all three of our settings are going to control something different about the photograph. The aperture controls how much of the photograph is in focus. So in this photograph, you can see like the baby's little her eyes are in focus and her mouth is in focus, and then just even this part of her head is out of focus. Okay, so when we photograph windows, this is our most important setting because we want everything in the frame to be in focus, right? So we are going to learn how to use aperture priority. And what aperture priority means is you're going to set, aperture is also called the f-stop, and this is how it will look on the back of your camera. So if you have this type of camera, you can press the display button, or I think other cameras have an info button, or if you just tap the shutter, you should be able to see this screen. So our f-stop is our aperture, and when we have it in aperture priority, we choose this number. We'll talk about those numbers in a second, but that's what your camera does. Your camera is going to choose your ISO for you. It's going to choose your shutter speed for you. It's going to look at whatever you point it at once you tap the shutter. If you point it at something and tap the shutter, it doesn't have to click. Just tap it a little bit to wake the camera up. You'll see you can move your camera around, and you'll see these numbers move around because your camera is deciding different settings. It's going to look at whatever scene you show it. It's going to make its best judgment and pick these other settings for you, which is awesome for us because we don't want to mess with these other settings. We just want to learn one thing while we're learning, and it's helpful. So once you're in aperture priority, this camera right now is in manual, so you should see AV or A right here. The knob is how you're going to turn your f-stop up or down, and you'll see these numbers go up or down, and that's good because your camera is adjusting. And then let's talk about what those numbers mean. You certainly don't have to memorize this, but the number that we want to start off with is f8 because that is going to give us quite a bit of focus. So you can just run your knob all the way up and all the way down, see how low it goes. Most of yours will probably go to 5.6, which is fine, but at 5.6 you're going to have about 3 feet of focus. And when I say that, I mean that if you're, let's say you're standing in the back of a room and you're taking a picture of the entire room, and you have 3 feet of focus, that means from, say you're focused on like the couch, you have 1.5 feet behind the couch, 1.5 feet in front of the couch that's going to be in focus, and everything else is going to be out of focus if it's behind or in front. So it's like it's very depth oriented. Okay, so f8 is going to give you a lot more. You're going to get about 5-6 feet of focus. Okay, so if you have a big room, you're going to want to go higher. Okay, but this is really what we're interested in when we're photographing an interior. And here's just an example, like you can see what a difference it makes. This is not a great example for interiors because I'm very close, so there's still kind of a blurry background. But at f22, you should be able to stand at the top of a mountain and get the entire scene in focus. I'm going to skip that because it's confusing. Okay, real quickly, we're going to talk about, oh, excuse me. Those were some other examples. Let me go back. Okay, so this is the f-stop at a small number. We have a very shallow focus. And then this is the f-stop at a very big number. You can see even these trees back here are in focus. So, but yes. Okay. So we're going to go through shutter speed and ISO real quickly. The shutter speed controls the movement of your subject, which is awesome. But we don't really need that because our subjects don't move. So, hooray! It also controls the movement of the camera. So if you're holding the camera and your shutter is open and you're moving it around, it's going to be blurry. So it is kind of important. Your shutter speed is basically like your eyelid. It's going to be how long you hold your eyes closed, basically, or how long it's open between blinks. Okay, so you can also do shutter priority. We're not really going to worry about that, but it's S or T, and that is where you choose the shutter speed and your camera chooses everything else. We are going to talk about this real quickly. So your shutter speed is in fractions of a second, and that's what this number means. If it goes really slowly, go ahead and put your camera in the T or S shutter priority, and then you can mess with the shutter. You can go all the way up to a super fast shutter and click it, and you'll hear it go really fast. It will click, click, click. And then you can take it way down low to a 30th of a second and click it, and you'll hear it go click, click. And that is really where you need a tripod. And because we're going to shoot everything in f8 or higher for our aperture, it's going to take our shutter speed way down low because it's going to need to keep the eyeball open longer to get the same amount of light. So anytime you go under 1/25th of a second, we're going to get out our tripod, which we're going to talk about why we need one later. But we're all going to own a cheap little tripod at the end of this webinar. So that's basically what it means. I'll just go through some examples here. Nope, sorry, got stuck. Oops. Okay. Which way is this going? Okay. So this was taken at like a 1/25th of a second. It was not on a tripod, and you can tell because it's a little bit blurry. Go back. These are very slow exposures, and being outside in the dark is, not that much different from being in a dark room. So this is why you're really going to need a tripod. This is a higher shutter speed. Bright sunlight during the day, you can catch a butterfly. And here's the example I wanted to show you. So this is somebody holding a camera without a tripod at an 80th of a second. It's just too slow to hold the camera. Everything's out of focus because just even imperceptible movements from the photographer will make it blurry. And here's quite a bit faster. It caught the dog, everything's in focus. Maybe you shifted slightly afterwards, you take slightly after you took the photograph, but it's not a big deal because the shutter went so fast it caught everything. Okay, I want to go through these again. Get back. Okay, let's talk about ISO real quickly. ISO controls the quality or noise or grain, if you remember the film days of a photograph. It's like putting shades on your camera. The ISO settings are pretty scattered. They could be anywhere. They're probably in your menu. You might be able to set it from the back of your camera. Right now, you're just going to make sure it's on auto. If you consistently run into problems, we'll worry about how to fix it. You can just email me. Okay, so if you remember back in the film days, there was 100 speed film, 400 speed film, and 800 speed film. And we all bought the 400 speed film because we either shot outside or indoors with the flash on the camera. And it's basically the same thing. Obviously, an ISO of 100 is going to give you the clearest, crispest photograph. And, you know, I recommend shooting on that, but sometimes you're not going to have that option. Sometimes you're going to have to go to 400 or 800. The more, just don't go in this area. Try not to go above 800. The more money you spent on your camera, the higher you can go. But most of the DSLRs that we have, we're probably going to want to stay at 800 or lower for quality purposes. Let me show you some examples. Okay, so this is an extreme close-up of a photograph. And you can see it's a little bit of noise, not too much, but in this one you can definitely tell. And this works just like your eyeball does. So in low light situations, your eyeball, it can see across the room, but it certainly can't see as well as it could if we were outside in bright daylight, right? So your camera can take a picture in low light situations, but just not as well. So, and these examples have, see, the 800 looks pretty good. It's not terrible. And you can see the 32 looks kind of bad, and the color is a little crazy. So the higher ISO you go to, the more your colors of the room are going to kind of saturate. So anything under 800 is better. Okay, so let's talk about how to put all these things together. And then after this, we'll do questions. Okay, so all of these settings combine to make a well-exposed photograph. And the most frustrating thing about photography is that there are just so many ways to get to this little area. You know, you can take the photograph with your settings way up here, or way over here, or way over here. And that's why photography is so hard to learn, because there are just so many options. We are mostly concerned with our aperture, though. So now, anytime, okay, every situation needs a certain amount of light to get in your camera to expose the image. So when we're taking a photograph of a room at f8, our shutter speed is going to be very slow because we're going to need to get more light in there. And if we turn our ISO down to 100, you know, we're going to need even more light, so our shutter speed is probably going to be even slower. So just look at the numbers at the top of the screen. You can see how they'll change based on the aperture has changed. So all of our other settings have changed. Just ignore this bottom part because I think it's confusing. Okay, just an example. So now that we know what those mean, we're going to choose our settings when we walk into a situation where we photograph an interior. We're not going to use program anymore because we don't need it anymore. We know what we're doing. We're not going to use shutter priority because our focus is the most important thing. So we're mostly concerned with our aperture. So we're going to set up our camera. We're going to put it on. We're going to start all our shoots on f8 and change it from there if we need to. And then we're going to look through our little camera hole. This is called viewfinder. By the way, all of this information you can see at the bottom of your screen if you look through your viewfinder if you tap the shutter, which is handy, but it's difficult to learn to use it. Okay, this little guy is our light meter, and this is how our camera tells us what it thinks of our image. So if we're on aperture priority, it's going to try to balance the light to this middle part, right? But if it's on manual and we change something, it's going to tell us what it thinks about that. It's going to say, I think that this picture is going to be too dark. If it goes in the negative, it's going to be too dark. And if it goes up here in the positive, it thinks it's going to be too bright, which is great, except when you're shooting into a window. And that's because your camera is going to decide what its exposure is based on the brightest picture in the brightest thing in the scene, which is going to be our window. So when you point your camera at a window with the blinds open and light streaming in, it's going to think that you want to look out the window, okay? Which is not very helpful for us. So we are going to use this little trick called exposure compensation. Let me come back to this. It's right here on the back of your camera, this little plus or minus box right here. And what exposure compensation does is you're in aperture priority, you've taken your f-stop to f8 and you've pointed it at the window and you're telling the camera, choose my shutter speed, choose my ISO, and I like what you're doing here, but I want you to add or subtract a little bit of light, which is good because we don't have to mess with the other settings. You can also do this in manual. You can put it in manual and do less or more for your shutter speed or less or more for your ISO, but that's where things get complicated. So we're going to use this little trick. We're going to let the camera decide for us these other settings, and we're going to tell it what we feel about that. So this is kind of like shooting into a window. So it's trying to expose to the best of its ability all of this stuff back here because it's like, oh my goodness, this bright light is so bright. I really need to make sure it's clear. Okay, and what happens is our subject is dark. So we're going to change our exposure compensation. We're just going to plus. We're going to add light. Okay, so the way you do this on most cameras is some of them you kind of have to use your buttons to get to this option. Or other ones you can hold this plus or minus button down and use your knob. But I think most of them you're going to have to go into your info or display and scroll to change it. Yes, okay, hold on. Some cameras have this little knob over here for you, which is super handy, but I don't think a lot of cameras do that anymore. Okay, so minus is going to subtract light, so our subject would be getting even darker, and plus is going to add light. And most cameras only go up to 2 or 3, so we're going to have to change something if it's not helping. And this is the little plus or minus button. Okay, your histogram is an important little tool. You might have to go in and turn it on. We're not really going to talk about it because most of our LCDs are going to be pretty accurate. But if you pull it into Photoshop, you can see that an image with pixels over here and over here is well exposed. So we have this nice little dip here. Okay, we're not going to talk about that. Okay, because that's mostly for portraits. Okay, now the interesting stuff, right? Oh, maybe we should stop to see if we have any questions. Are there any questions, Deb? Are you there? No? Okay. Okay, let's go to part 2. You can email me if you have any questions about that. Let's talk about...
I'm unmuted.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Deb?
Deb?
Okay. Let's talk about planning your shoot. Okay, so your photographs are the single most important advertising tool that you have. I know that word of mouth is the most effective advertising tool that we have, but it's really only going to get your clients in the door. After they're in the door, you kind of have to slap them in the face with your work. You know, you want them like dizzy with admiration. Okay, and I will tell you that I see professional photos around me all day, at least 100 of them just in my face all day. They're everywhere. They're advertising. They're on my Facebook feed. I think 97% of my friends have a profile picture that's professional, like from their wedding or family portraits or headshots. It's everywhere. And we're really super saturated with good images right now. We're in sort of an image renaissance. Okay, so a bad image really sticks out like a sore thumb. And speaking as a consumer, if I go to a website or like somebody's Facebook page and I see that they don't have great photographs, I just kind of subconsciously assume that they're not as professional. And it's not something I do on purpose, but I honestly will take my money to the better picture, and maybe that's because I'm a photographer, but it's very true, okay? And you do this sort of work that is extremely detailed, and it also, you know, brings the room together. It has a nuance, it has balance, and this really needs to come through so that potential clients see this and they can picture their living room looking just like this, even if the photograph you're showing them is a image of like a $250,000 house with windows everywhere, beautiful light. You know, they're going to want their house to look like this. And really, when you're selling them your work, you're selling them a mental image of the finished product. Okay, so you really have to help them visualize that. So I'll get off my high horse here for a second, but just really consider that when you're photographing your work, because you cannot take all of your prospective clients into your old clients' homes. That would be awesome if you could, but you can't do that. So you really have to give them the closest feel that you can.
Unmuted.
Okay, so let's talk about this. We're really going to plan our photos from now on. We're going to give ourselves extra time to take a good picture. You know, you're going to tell the client that it's going to take another hour to do installation because afterwards you're going to do a really great photo shoot. And instead of like trying to get a shot in 3 minutes before they walk in the door, right? So we're going to plan this. Let me just skip to this slide. Just keep in mind that in an interior, the light's going to change by the hour, okay? So the time of day is really important. Like this, this is probably an east or west facing window. And I'm sure Kirsch did this on purpose because they wanted the light stream through the blinds, which is a decision you can make if you want to. But if I were doing, well, you know, a different kind of window treatment, maybe fabric, I would not want these bright spots on the couch. You know, I would choose a later hour. Oops, excuse me. Okay, so you're going to choose the best possible time of day for that room. You're not going to do an east-facing room at sunrise, and you're not going to do a west-facing room at sunset. You know, that sort of thing. You're going to do a north-facing room probably past 10 or 11, so you don't get those bands of sunlight coming in. You're going to also know your equipment very well. So what you're going to do is you're going to set up your tripod, and you're going to set up your camera, and you're going to take a photograph of a window in your house every hour for the entire day, and then the next day you're going to do it at a different window, and then the next day you're going to do it at a different window so that you really understand how your camera works and how to change things, so that you know how to use everything long before you walk into a client's home, because nothing makes you feel more silly than not knowing your equipment in front of a client. When you walk into the room, you're going to start just like subconsciously thinking about where you want to take this picture from. And, you know, most of the time it's going to slap you in the face. You're going to be like, I want that angle. But sometimes you'll be walking around the room and you'll be like, oh, that could be a good angle too. I'll just think about that. You're also going to stage the room. You know, you're going to fluff the fabric. You're going to have everything swept and dusted, and I'm sure we're all very good about this, but it's really important. You know, if you have undesirable objects, you're just going to be like, hey, so-and-so, do you mind if I move this? It's kind of distracting, you know, or you're going to rearrange that vase of flowers so that it looks good. Okay, and you're going to bring all your equipment with you. You can leave it in the car, maybe bring it inside just in case, because the worst thing is to not have something that you need, and then, you know, you might not ever get back in that house again. Okay, so we're going to start photographing now. I'm going to say this right now that you need a tripod because we're going to shoot everything at f8 or higher, which is going to help our white balance level out and be, you know, more consistent. And it's also going to help us get everything in focus. So let me just say you need a tripod. This one is $14 on Amazon, and it has a nice little case. You can just sling it over your shoulder with your purse. It weighs about 2 pounds. This is a Gorilla Pod. These things are really cool. You can put them on top of a bookshelf or a railing or just whatever you need it for. But I do recommend this because most of the time you're not going to have a counter to put this guy on. So we have our tripod, we have our camera. We're going to walk in. We're going to choose either manual or aperture because we're concerned with our focus. Probably aperture while you're learning. Okay, then we're going to put it on f8 to start out. Right, this is our f-stop, our aperture, so I'm going to use the knob. Everybody good there? Oh, am I muting you, Deb?
Nope, you're good.
I don't know how to unmute you. Oh, okay, sorry, I saw a note in the thing. Okay, back to our slideshow here. Okay, then we're going to take a test photo. You're going to take it without your flash, and which your camera will let you do. It won't pop up automatically when we are in aperture or manual. And then we're going to see what the scene looks like, and then we're going to use our exposure compensation to add or subtract light if we need it. Is anybody practicing this now? Okay, so you're set up in the house and you've done that and you're like, Brandy, this is the same picture I've been taking. This looks, what are you talking about? This looks bad. Oh wait, oh, I can add exposure compensation. Okay, well, that's better. Yeah, okay, well, I kind of really want to see the interior, so maybe I'll add some more. Okay, yeah, that's better, but the best thing about this room is the view. And I mean, that's why we did hideaway blinds, because we wanted to see the view. So we're going to fall back on what we always do, which is turn the flash on to light up the space. And it's going to look the same as all the pictures we've been taking. So this is where we run into trouble. And this is why shooting a window is one of the most difficult things you can do in photography. Unless you have a big wall of windows on this side of the frame, you just don't have enough light over here to expose this unfortunately dark couch and this beautiful view back here. And this could be something that you want to do. Like maybe there's a DHL truck out here that's bright and yellow, you don't want anyone to see it. So you can add exposure compensation to blow out the window, which is great. You can get some lovely photographs this way, and that's how you do it. But most of us want the whole scene to be bright. So we're going to turn the flash on our camera on, and then we're going to get frustrated again because something like this will happen. We'll turn our flash on, and then it lights up this part, but the back of the room is still dark. Ugh, that's annoying. Or, it does get everything nice and bright, but the room just has no depth. It's kind of like it looks like if I sit in this chair, my butt's going to slide right all the way down to the floor. Or it just doesn't have enough power to light up the room more than the window, And here's one of the most frustrating things about the flash on top of your camera is it sucks, and it's always going to suck. The flash on top of my $2,000 camera sucks, and it's only because of its location. Anytime you put a tiny little flashlight size bulb directly over the lens, it's going to look bad. And, you know, it's just one of the unfortunate things about the flash that's attached to your camera. But we're going to talk about how to overcome that real quickly. So part of being a photographer, instead of just taking pictures, is manipulating the light. So one of the things we're going to start doing is adding light to our scene in a much prettier way. So we need to add light to the picture earlier of the couch that was still too dark. And if you're taking this photograph and you want these curtains or draperies to show the detail, let's say you put these fabulous little embellishments on them, but you just cannot see them, then we need to add light to this scene because, I mean, this is lit pretty well. You know, we can tell that this is a little alcove and there's space between the curtain and the window. And if we just change our settings, this is going to start to get too bright to see what's going on, and this is going to start to get really too bright. It's going to kind of like just turn into a white blob. Okay, so we're going to add light to our scene in a nice, subtle way. I'll show you how to do that in a second. Or if you have distracting dark areas like that couch earlier. Or if your space is just kind of too flat. Can't really tell what's going on there. Oh, I hit arrows. I guess this was the dark area. I can't see much detail on the desk. Okay, so let's talk about how to use a flash that doesn't suck. There are a couple ways to do this, and you don't have to buy an external flash, but I have one on here to show you that is like $60. It's not terrible. But what's going to make the light prettier, and it's going to give us a better color balance, and it's going to make the room look soft and appealing, is to take our flash and bounce it off a wall or a ceiling. What that does is basically it acts like a giant reflector, and it's going to bring the light coming from, instead of pointed straight at you, it's going to come down from above you, which is just more natural. That's the way the sun works, so that's what we're used to. Let's see. You can only do this with a white wall or a white ceiling, though. If you have a green wall and you point your flash at a green wall, it's going to collect all of the greenness in that wall and spit it back out at you. So, but fortunately for us, most ceilings are white. Most of them are 8 feet tall. And that's good for us because we can just get one of these little cheap little flashes. This is a Neewer. It's $64 on Amazon. It's super cool. And then you just point it straight up. You put it on TTL, which is your flash setting, and it's going to do all of the calculation for you, and it's going to go off with whatever strength it needs to. Just make sure it has fresh batteries, and I will show you how much better our picture is going to look in a second. If you don't want to buy an external flash, you can get this little guy, which is just a mirror, and you could obviously just tape a mirror to your flash, and what that does is it points the light up at the ceiling, and then it scatters back down. These are probably better because they're going to give us more light, so if you have a bigger room, this might not give you enough light because these bulbs are pretty tiny. But, you know, not a big investment and certainly worth it. I have some tutorials that at the end I will put in the chat box that y'all can use. Okay, so here's our picture. We still want to light up the couch, so we're going to bounce our flash off the ceiling, and oh my God, that's very nice. That's a beautiful picture. You can see the view, you can see the couch. You know, this part's a little dark, but you know, we're not going to argue with it. That's a good picture. We're happy with that. Good. Okay, so if you don't want to use flash, you can use this extremely cheap way to add light to a room, and it's called a reflector. Here's a little example. This is really great for your detail shots. Sorry, I think I'm going to run over here. I only have about 10 more minutes of stuff to show you. So
You're doing fine.
the reflector, oh, okay, thanks. Okay, so see how we're looking at this picture and we're just not really interested in the brownies. They look good, but I'm really looking at this thing, aren't I? I can't stop looking at it. I don't know why. But I bring this reflector in and I just bounce a little bit of light back in, and suddenly I cannot stop looking at this brownie. And it looks good. So this is really good for your detail shots. You can buy one of these on Amazon. They're kind of expensive. And they're not very big. The bigger you get, the more expensive they are. And frankly, it's really not going to help you that much for an entire room. If you have a window with good light pointing in at you and you have a 3-foot reflector, you can kind of bounce it back and get maybe 6 feet of light, depending on how far back you can get. But really, that's really more for details, or if there's just one little part of the room you want to light up, like that couch we talked about earlier. You can also do this for like $3. So you can get a big piece of foam core at Walgreens or an art supply store. It's like that thick cardboard, and you just put a piece of aluminum foil on it, and there you go. Or you can just use the white for a little bit softer light. Like this one was probably not a highly reflective surface. It was probably just like a piece of white paper, honestly. We'll do this. That's all you really need. The good thing about these reflectors are that they have these little interchangeable sleeves, and this little gold one would be really nice for like a nice warm room that you really want to project some warm light into. But you can find, yes? You can find those on Amazon for.
Brandy, where would you place this? Where they're wondering, like, where would you place this to bounce the light or to add the light through, like the foam core covered in aluminum foil or whatever?
Right, and I have a tutorial that I can send you a link to. But basically, if you have the window, if you're facing the window, you put the reflector down into the light that's streaming in. You don't have to have direct light, but you'll put it down into the light, and if you move it around, you can see the light. It kind of focuses it like a flashlight. You can see it bouncing the light back and forth. So like if you want to go to your cupboard right now and get a piece of aluminum foil, you can try it out right now. Just go to the window, put down the aluminum foil, and just kind of like move it around, and you can see the light move. And it's really self-explanatory once you just physically do it in front of you.
Awesome tip.
And yeah. It's so cheap. Okay, so here's some examples. I actually stole these from online. I don't think these are Visions ones, but like you can see in all of these pictures, the light is coming in from behind these things, but you can still see the front part of this. So obviously someone has come in with some sort of either like just white reflector or silver reflector and filled in a little bit of light. Because if it wasn't there, you would just see this edge and maybe these two rims, and then this part would be dark. And you really wouldn't be able to see the details. And honestly, this one, there's probably just another wall of windows behind it, but that acts as a good light fill as well if there's a window behind you too. Okay. We can also add light to a scene with this guy. This is a it's called an incandescent portable work light, and it is $7 at Lowe's. You just screw a light bulb into it. I think you might need a cord with it too. But it has a nice little clamp. You can clamp it to a bookshelf, or you can hide it behind the bed, or anything like that. And you just put a light bulb in it and click it on, and you have another light. And I'll show you how to use these in a second with an example picture. The only thing is if you use constant lighting, you really have to pay attention to what color your light bulb is. You just get a regular light bulb. If you get a daylight balanced light bulb, this is going to be a blue light. Okay, so if you put it right next to a lamp, it's going to look weird. So maybe get a couple different light bulbs, and the wattage is really just whatever wattage you want. You could use a 50 watt for a nice little small pop of light. You could use a 100 watt if you need a bunch of light. You could steal this light bulb from another place in their house so it matches their lighting, you know, just whatever you need. Just pay attention to the color of the light. So if it doesn't say daylight balanced, it's going to be like that regular warm lighting, incandescent lighting. I think these are $7, so this is like a $14 setup here. This is a great tip I learned in college. Okay, so back to our picture that we took with the bouncing flash. That looks good. We're happy with it. You know, until we realize that, I really wish I could see more back here. It's it has some depth. It looks pretty good. Okay, but maybe we're going to add a little light right here because this spot is dark. And then maybe we're going to add one of those little portable lights back here, or a portable flash. Or maybe we're going to take a reflector and point this light back here and point it at the couch. Or maybe we're going to put a little light back here. And then suddenly you have an amazing picture. Like this could be on the cover of a magazine. It's gorgeous, right? And it's such a subtle change, but it really changes the picture. You can see how different it looks. I mean, we're happy with this. This looks good. We can see everything we need to see, but this looks amazing, right? And really, if you're in a space, that's why we're going to add that extra hour to our installation time, so we have time to like mess with it. Like, you know, maybe we put the light back here and it looked weird, so we moved it over here, and you know, we're going to take a couple and we're going to move things around and just do them the way we want them so they look good. And our camera is doing all the work for us right now. It's metering for this window and it's metering for this window, and it sees that there's light coming in over here to light up this couch, and it's just, it looks good, and our camera's happy with it and giving us a great exposure, and we don't have to add the exposure compensation anymore. We can put it back to 0. So that's why adding light really takes our picture to a new level. If you're feeling ambitious, you can do this with flashes too. If you consider yourself to be more of an expert, you can do this with flashes. You can get these, one second, I'll go back to that. These little cheap $64 flashes. Oh, you know what? These are $30 flashes. Don't get these for bouncing flashes because they don't have TTL, which is important. So, but these ones are great because if it's off camera, it just has this little scale for add light, minus light. Awesome. That's all you really need. You don't need to know the numbers. You don't need to know that. You just like put it all the way down, hide it back here behind the chair or the bed. Like obviously there's a light back here that you can see the little shadow. There's no, somebody added a light back there. Somebody probably added a light over here, that sort of thing. So yeah, we're going to add light to dark spots. If you're going to use off-camera flashes, you're going to put it on the lowest possible settings because we don't want to add too much light. We want to add little pops of light because that's what mood lighting is. And we want to try not to put too much lighting going up from the floor because it can start to look unnatural. And then if you use off-camera flashes, you have to make sure that your flashes, and you can get gels to put on top of them, you have to make sure that your flashes are going to be the same color as the rest of the room. And then you're going to need these things. You're going to need a radio slave and a stand maybe. You don't have to have one, but it's helpful because they come with little feet and you can put them on bookshelves or counters. If you want to get crazy, you can get a little softbox, but all of this stuff is crazy cheap. So this is $6. I think this is $20. These flashes are $30. This stand, I don't know how much the stand is, but it's like $15. So you don't have to spend $1 million to take pictures like this. Just I don't remember what I was supposed to say here. But you can see what a difference it makes. Okay, so this is the troubleshooting section, which is why we're all here, because we're frustrated with glare. So the reason I'm having you put your f-stop at f8 is because it's really going to help with flare coming from the window. We've all taken that picture where we're taking a picture of a window and there's like this blue glare like seeping on to the window treatment because the window is so bright. And if that keeps happening, you need to turn your ISO down because your camera is being way too sensitive to the light. So you just need to tell it to man up and take it down to 800 or 400 or 100. And the higher f-stop will help with that. You can try a different time of day, like noon is a great time of day because the light is coming in from the window indirectly, so it's not going to be as intense. You can try a different angle. That's not going to help too much, but sometimes it does. Okay, so flare from a flash is troublesome as well. And this mainly happens when we use the flash on top of our camera. If you're bouncing your flash, it might happen too, but it might not be as distracting. But you can try taking it from a different angle or a different time of day, or yeah, it's really frustrating. You can also use black paper. You can take like a black sheet of paper, like a big construction paper, you know, you get at the art store or grocery store even, and just put it in front of your flash. And you might still get some flare on the sides, but it won't be so bad, and that helps with your reflection too. You can just put a sheet of paper in front of you. You know, obviously you have to maybe cut a hole out for the lens, or you know, just put it around the lens. But that can stop your reflection from showing up the window. If it's nighttime, that's not going to help that much, but if you do have some daylight out, that will help. Let's see. Multiple exposures. I do have some hacks we can use, and there are some free editing softwares online that can help you with this, but they're not going to be great. You know, maybe if you know someone that knows Photoshop, you can try this, and we'll talk about that in a second. Yep, and if nothing else is working, you're going to have to do multiple exposures and try to fix it in Photoshop. It's frustrating, but sometimes it's all we've got. Hold on. Okay, so let's talk about, oh, I see. Okay, let's talk about dealing with unwanted objects. So we've all shot the bedroom, and the bed is in the way, and we can't move the bed because, you know, they get mad about that when you move their furniture. There's not too much we can do if we can't move it except for try a different angle. We could try maybe take your shoes off and stand on top of the bed. You can try staging the object in a way where it's less distracting. So like if this was, maybe if this bed had like a blue comforter that they happen to have, maybe it would be less distracting, but you know, can't always change their bedding. You can try to do, you can stand in front of the bed and try to do a panoramic. That has its own issues. It can get difficult, so don't use that as your go-to. That's kind of like a last resort. But immovable objects can be frustrating, so let me talk about a tilt shift lens can help us with that too. Okay, so these are the things we're going to do in area of last resort. So let's talk about HDR. What HDR is you're going to take 3 pictures of the same scene set up exactly the same way without moving your tripod. You're going to take a picture that's too dark, you're going to take a picture that's just right, and you're going to take a picture that's too bright. And then you're going to use one of the many free software options online to put them all together. And we get these images that you just really can't tell. Like, you can tell a little bit, like maybe it's a little bit too gray where it should be white. And maybe there's just a little extra definition that you wouldn't normally see. But it doesn't look terrible. You know, it looks pretty good. You can kind of tell here in the window plane, like this is probably white, and without HDR this would be totally white. But really you kind of have to know what you're looking for to tell with that. Also, when you HDR, your colors are going to get a little more saturated, so you want to be careful with that. And then sometimes you can get this color shift where like this probably would have been blown out in white, but now it's kind of blue. So that's one of the things to look out for in HDR. That's why these are last resorts. A panoramic. This is a gorgeous panoramic done by some wonderful professional photographer whose tutorial I have here at the bottom for you. But you have to be very careful with panoramics. This was probably taken in like 3 photographs that were stitched together in Photoshop. There's lots of free software out there that will do this for you. Photoshop will do it for you. But it can also end up looking like this, which, you know, is not really the look you're going for. It's cool, but it's not really, like, look at this window and look at this rug. It's totally stretched, you know? So you have to be careful with panoramics. If you're going to do a panoramic, what you're going to do is you're going to keep the camera on the tripod. You have to use a tripod with a panoramic. And then you're going to take a photograph and you're going to overlap sections of the photograph in the next photograph. So you're going to take this picture and then you're going to turn the camera slightly and take this picture. Then you turn the camera slightly and take this picture. You're going to take a bunch of pictures. And that way, Photoshop has plenty of room to understand what goes together. You're not going to take, you know, this half of the room and then move the camera to this edge and then take this half. It's not going to work. Okay, if worse comes to worse and you do have to stand in front of that bed to get the drapery, we're going to talk about the tilt-shift lens. And tilt-shift lenses were basically invented for architecture, because when you're standing too close to your subject, and you kind of have to tilt the camera up, right, to get the whole thing. So you get this weird little bending of the subject like this, right? You can see the bottom part is way fatter than the top part. And that doesn't help us. And what a tilt shift lens does is it lets you correct for that. So you're going to adjust the knobs on the side and move it until it looks correct, which is wonderful, but these lenses can be expensive, but they're very helpful. Oh, okay. So I'm sure you have plenty of questions, so that's all I've got for you. And let me exit my presentation here and send you all these wonderful links that I have for you.
We might have might have to go back to a couple of slides or whatever, so, but I do have a bunch of questions. If you have any, please go in. Mary suggested when you were showing the reflectors, I thought this was a great tip, you can use the those windshield reflector covers. You know, that you put in the windshield.
As long as it's white or silver.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If it's a color, it's going to change the color.
Right. Okay. Let me see. I'm going through the questions here. Kind of drew them for you in order. In the picture of the room with the view, the last one, where you lit up the back corners by the dining room table, what kind of light were you, you were actually putting different lights in there, or were you reflecting light?
Okay, so this is done with off-camera flashes. You can get the same look with the steady light bulb ones, but this is not using just a reflector, because if you use just a reflector, it's kind of like a blanket of light. You can't really focus it. So this was done with, like, there's a little light back here, just one light. There's one light back here.
Okay. So basically you were setting up that you bought some of those, like if you were doing constant lighting, you bought some of those $7 work lamps and you stuck them behind the table and turned them on.
Yes.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah,
That's what Sue and
you
everyone.
can't see them, but
right.
And the only trouble with those work lamps is they need a cord, so you have to have a plug that you can hide.
And here's the other thing is, are they pointed up? Are they pointed down? Or do you just kind of play with that based on the room?
Yeah, and you can play with that. You can see kind of the ceiling. There, it's much brighter. It kind of lit up the ceiling. You can see the light back here.
Uh-huh.
And uplighting does look natural as long as you don't overuse it.
Good point.
You know, 'cause, yeah.
So shooting window treatments. Jennifer has a great question. Is it best typically to shoot straight on the window or off to one side or the other?
Um, you know, one way is not better or the other. If you're having trouble, um, stepping to the side can definitely help. But depending on how close you are to the window and what lens you're using, you can start to get some distortion if you step too far off to the side.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, maybe the angle of the room is better over in that corner. It really just depends on like your composition. You know, if it looks good, go with it.
Good. I like that one. So Sue has another great question. You talked about time of day. Is there a best time of day for, let's say, taking pictures for like north versus, and then a better time in south and east and west?
Right. So the sun rises in the east, and then it's going to spill a whole bunch of light into your east-facing window, right? So, and that's going to get really problematic because it's going to put hot spots all over your room, and your camera's going to try to measure for those, and it's going to look splotchy. And I would do midday is the best time for most rooms. I have a east-facing window upstairs, and I know that that room looks really great between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. because the room is still nice and bright, but the light has stopped streaming in through the window directly.
Uh-huh.
But if you can play it safe and just do noon, because all rooms are going to have good light at noon.
Good to know. So guys, schedule your photography appointments midday. So looking at the picture that you have up now on the screen, Rachel has another good question. So let's say that in the side view here, if this was a side yard that had had a car in it or something, that you want to blow out. Her question is it okay to let it blow out so it doesn't draw attention, or will it because it's blown out draw the eye anyway because it's so bright?
Okay, so let's pretend that there's something ugly out here and we do want to blow this out. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these little lights that we put everywhere and we're going to make them brighter somehow. Maybe we're going to put another light in there, and that way when we take the photograph, they can compete with the extra light. We're going to add the exposure compensation, and that way this is nice and bright, but we've still lit up these other parts. And then it should balance the photograph out. So you can still have this light, this window glowing, and, wait, where's the other one? You can still have it nice and bright, but as long as you can see everything else in the window in the room without it competing, it's not a problem. I mean, we see rooms with, some of these ads that I have in here have the window blown out, and it looks fine. It's not distracting.
So now, guys, now you know why professional photographers get the kind of fees that they do when you're having professional photography taken. Sometimes you think they're walking in and taking a picture. It's like, okay, now I respect. Not that I didn't respect photographers before, but it's more than just walking in and taking a picture. It's moving lights around. It's a lot.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. So I have a couple other questions. Can you go over just again quickly? Christy is wanting another shot at explaining exposure compensation.
Okay. For anyone looking at the chat window, I've just put a bunch of Amazon links to equipment and some tutorials.
Perfect.
Okay, let's go back to exposure compensation. So exposure compensation is basically you've told your camera what aperture you want it set at, and your camera's going to choose all your other settings for you. and then you tell your camera, that's great, I like what you're doing, but I just want you to add maybe a little bit more light. So what it's doing is you're saying, camera, please keep what you have, but maybe add a little bit of light. So it's kind of hard to explain. So basically, nothing has changed between these two pictures, except that we told the camera that we're going to keep doing this. We're just going to add a little bit of, okay, when I say add a little bit of light, what your camera is doing is it's slightly adjusting either the ISO or the shutter. It is changing your settings a little bit, but it's not doing it in a way that's going to change the basic functions of the photo.
Got it.
I feel like I didn't really help.
No, I know, and it's kind of like you'll have the aha moment at some point, right?
Yeah. It really requires a lot of practice, and if you mess with it, just at least once a day, it'll start to come together.
Okay, so a lot of us are in the customer's home and are using the iPhones and the iPads to take quote-unquote photography that we want to, whether we want to use it online or in our marketing or for competitions or whatever it is. Your take on that, and any tips on using your smartphones or tablets as cameras? Stay away from it. It's okay. Any thoughts there?
I mean, there are a lot of professional photographers out there taking professional iPhone pictures, and that's fine. It's a little more difficult to control some things, like you can't change your lens, and you can't really, the iPad and the iPhone have this great thing where when you're pointing the camera, or you're pointing the phone at the subject, you can hold your finger down on a certain point of the picture until it locks. I think it'll say AF lock. And your phone will then start to expose for that part of the picture, which I just learned and I thought that was awesome. And if you're using this lighting, like this constant lighting, to help add some little pops of light to your picture, then your iPhone can take a good photograph. The problem is you can't really control your ISO, which is part of the problem when you get a lot of flare or glare, that light that kind of spills on to the window treatment that kind of changes its color or makes it look blurry. You can't really control that with the iPhone, and if you're getting that in your picture, there's not much you can do about it.
Right. Okay, so in regards to off-camera flashes, Terry and Eileen both have a couple of good questions. How do they work? Do they automatically sync with the camera? Is it through Bluetooth, or, do they have cords? They're nifty little devices, but how do they work?
Okay, so this little guy is called a hot shoe flash trigger receiver. And it is, this little piece goes on top of your camera on that hot shoe part that I was talking about earlier where you would put your flash. And then this guy attaches to the bottom of your flash, and then you plug this little cord in. So whenever you take a photograph with your camera, this sends a radio signal to this and fires the flash.
Perfect.
So, yeah, it's pretty cool.
Awesome.
And this thing is $20. You don't need to spend, you don't need to get the $400 pocket wizards. Those work fine.
Right.
But you
Exactly.
do need one of these per flash, these little receivers.
Okay. All right. So if you want to put these in 3 different places in the room, you need 3 of these babies.
Exactly.
Got it.
That's where it starts to get expensive.
Perfect. Any suggestions for taking sharper images? And I know I have this issue too, Catherine, is even if I'm using a tripod, for some reason they just don't seem sharp enough.
Okay, that is because your aperture is probably low, and that's why I'm suggesting shooting at f8, and because that's going to give us more focus.
Okay.
And if you're photographing and they still seem soft, make this number higher.
Got it. Okay, perfect. And then
Oh,
eight,
also,
oh,
let me
sorry, go
say
ahead.
that if if the image is kind of dark and you have to brighten it up later, that's also going to make it look soft.
Oh,
Just a note.
yeah, that could be the reason. Yeah, I have issues with dark photos. Oh my gosh. Okay, so Eileen also says, so HDR, is
Yes.
you taking the three pictures and then are you photoshopping the three together? Is that, it's an after hack?
Oh, yes, it's you do it afterward. Here, I don't think. Let me put that in the chat. These are free online, just websites that will do it for you.
Mhm.
Um, you can also, if you own Photoshop, some versions of Photoshop do this. Um, you just for these websites, you select your three images, upload them. The website does it for you, and then it lets you download and save that image.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. You know, if I might, one of the
Mm-hmm.
apps that I've been using on my iPhone and my iPad is Pro HDR,
Mm-hmm.
and it does this. It does it for you. So it takes the three pictures and then it stitches them together.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like a really simple editing program right on your phone right after you see the picture and you can play with it. But you have to stand still while it takes the three pictures, so it does work better if you like put your phone or your iPad on a tripod. But
Right.
it's like $2 and it has helped me in my search for a decent being able to take a different picture.
Right. And if you're gonna even you can even do that with these lights, and it would probably look wonderful. Like it might brighten this couch up a little bit. And you can also get if you insist on doing iPhone and iPad photography, that would be great. And you can also get an iPhone tripod because when you do HDR, you really cannot move it at all because it overlaps, so it might look weird.
Yeah, right. It's an okay fix for like if I'm taking like before pictures and I'm getting all that blowout and everything in the room, and I'm
Hmm.
wanting to do before afters or whatever. But I'm actually thinking I'm going to get the flash thing you were just talking about to bounce it off the light. I think that's going to make a huge difference for
Yeah,
me.
this guy. You're talking about this guy, Deb?
Yeah, this one.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's gonna help.
Okay,
So,
any other questions before we let Brandy go? This was super, super informative, and I think
oh,
guys
good.
can all see that for, playing around a little bit and for a relatively small investment, you can really take some professional shots of those room settings, whether it is for the design comp, because we really want all of you to enter. We love that, and we're always looking for photography for the magazine. Susan is always looking for editorial content and or just for your own use. We were talking earlier, as I said to Brandy, the thing about, as you said, you have this image renaissance. It's like the amount of visual images that are being eaten up in a 24-hour period with all the kind of digital media that we're on, whether it's Pinterest or Facebook or whatever, is crazy. So
hmm
we really have to start getting out there and taking shots of our work.
hmm
So I really appreciate this. This was awesome, Brandy. Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
having me. I hope everybody learned something.
Yeah, and now you know Brandy, guys, and if you're in Vegas at Vision 15, watch for her. She's the gal with the ladder and the camera. Thanks so much, guys.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Bye bye.